and welcome back to the BCR Dawson sub. I have spent the last 8 months painting all of the track on the layout, and that process is now complete. In the last layout update I shared with you my progress on track painting at Chetwynd and Dawson Creek and Septimus, and in this video I will share the final steps in track detail painting. And with this process now behind me, I am working on reactivating the layout for operations once again, so let's get everyone caught up to date. We're here in Chetwynd Yard. I am on step 3 now of track detail painting. I'm using a flat white and an angled brush to capture the raised detail on the track. And what I'm doing is I'm loading up the brush, removing most of the paint, and then just dragging that brush along the top of the track. And what I'm trying to do is just catch the raised portion of the detail that's molded into the ties. So we load up the paintbrush, and then I'm going to end up removing most of the paint until there's just a little bit left on the brush. I've done the 4 back tracks already, and I'm now going to do the next 4 up front here. I don't know if the camera will pick up what I'm doing here. It's a very subtle effect, but here we go. And I'll wipe it with my finger sometimes, just if there's any extra excess paint. I can usually pick it up with my finger before it dries. And then what we'll do is just come down the outside of the ties. And for that I align the brush this way. So there we go. We've got a lot of track to do, so I'll get on with it and then we'll move on to the next step. I am on step 4 of track detail painting in Chetwynd Yard. I am using Vallejo black acrylic mixed with water to get a nice thin wash. I'm using an angled brush, and I do 1 pass down between the rails. These tracks have already been done. This is a subtle effect. This is going to fill in some of those depressions that are molded into the tie detail and hopefully highlight them a little bit. After going down between the rails, I then go down along the sides of the track. So these are the ties that are outside the rails. And if you feel that anywhere you got a little bit too much on, we can just basically go back and mop it up with a brush. So we will continue with this step. I've got about another half of the yard to do, and then we'll go on to the next one. This is step 5 of painting the track in Chetwynd Yard. So I'm painting the rails with Flocal Rail Brown. I'm using a brush to do this. And unlike the previous 2 steps where I was using a minimal amount of paint on the brush, here I want sufficient paint to be able to flow along the rail, particularly down on the web of the rail between the tie retention clips. Otherwise the brush sort of skips along the tops of those clips and misses a good chunk of the rail. So you want decent paint flow. So I paint the back rails and then I come around and do the front rails. Where you see me wiping the rail with my fingers, I'm just removing some paint that's on the ties, and that'll usually come off with the fingers if I get it right away. Then we've got to remove the paint from the tops of the rails before it sets up. So I start with a wooden block, and then I switch to a track cleaning block, just so this doesn't get clogged with paint too much. The wooden block will take off most of the paint, and then this will do the final polishing to make sure that the track is nice and clean again. So there we go, that's step 5 of painting the rails. I'm approaching the halfway point in Chetwynd Yard, and I've got another half to do. And then after that, we're going to look at Dawson Creek. Step 6 of painting track details at Chetwynd. I'm now on the tie retention clips. I basically hit these with some Flocal Rust. It's basically just a highlight. So I use a very small brush so that the paint doesn't go places I don't want it to. And we just go along and hit those clips. If a little bit of paint leaches down onto the ties, I'm not worried about that. We all know that rust leaches from those tie plates out onto the ties, and it's a kind of a nice effect. So I'll just show you a little bit of how I do this. So there we go, and I'll continue on with this, and then we'll show you what the finished result looks like. I have finished all the track detail painting at Chetwynd Yard, so we'll take a scan through the yard and look at the results. This was slightly less than a month's work, with the initial painting, the spraying of the initial colors, and then the white dry brushing, the black wash, painting the rails, which took quite a bit of time, and then the rust highlight on the tie retention clips. So I'm glad to have this done. It's looking more like a rail yard now. You can see I went a little heavier with the black wash in the area of the turnouts. They tend to be darker. And the next step will be to make sure all the turnouts are working correctly, that they haven't actually been frozen up with paint, and then to get the track thoroughly clean, and then we'll do some operations to test that everything works perfectly. This is the end of track presently at the south end of the yard. So Chetwynd is done, and I'm now going to move on to Dawson Creek on the next level up. I have moved on to track detail painting at Dawson Creek Yard, and step 3, dry brushing of white onto the ties. I was previously using a Model Master flat white paint for this, and that paint's unfortunately dried up now and finished. So I had to find a replacement, and the only thing I could find was this Tamiya XF2, which is a flat white enamel. It's a little more runny or liquid than the Testors was, so what I'm having to do is apply some onto a card, let it dry out for a few minutes, and then load up the brush. Again, we want a very minimal amount of paint on this application. We're not trying to paint the ties white, we just want to highlight the raised details on the ties. So I'll just show you a little bit of what this looks like. Do the outside first, just coming along and hitting the tops of the ties. I might miss some entirely, and then others will get a little bit of detail on the raised portion. I'm having to work underneath the lighting canopy, so the access in here is quite limited. Do the next side. Again, I do not want to lose the overall effect of the railroad tie brown, so this is very much a highlight application. Just hoping to hit the tops of the raised detail on the ties. So that's the outside on either side, and then apply some more paint, and we'll go down the middle. So by letting the paint just dry out for a couple of minutes, it becomes less viscous. I did experiment with various acrylic paints. I just found they were all too thin for this. It tends to flood the tie, and that's not what I want. I just want to hit the tops of the raised detail. So we do need a thicker paint. And it would appear that these days most paints are not made for brushing, they're made for airbrushing. And you need to get them thicker. You can see I'm starting very lightly until I start to see a transfer of white paint. And then I can push harder to get exactly what I want. And what I want is that brown showing through the various highlights of white, and this gives the look of an aged tie quite well, I think. So I will continue on with this, and we'll see you again at the next step. Step 4 of track detail painting at Dawson Creek. I'm applying a black wash. This is an acrylic wash so that it does not disturb the other paints that are already there. This is the 4th color to go on the track, and what we're now getting is a layering of colors, which provides for a lot of subtle variations in the color of the track, which is sort of the look I'm going after. So with this, a little bit of water to dilute the paint, and what I do is I try to get rid of a fair amount of it off the brush, and I will start with going down the sides of the ties. And what this is going to do is settle down in the crevices and depressions in the molding on the ties, and eventually it'll leave the other colors visible, and that's what gives us some variation. After going down the sides, I then go down the middle. Again, I start lightly and then push harder if I want more paint on the track. And what I now start to see are some black lines in between those ridges. And the white is getting toned down a little bit from when it first went on. It's now taking on more of a light gray appearance. So eventually all of these colors work together to give us a look of weathered track. This stage can go fairly quickly, actually. And then after this is done, we will move on to painting of the rails. And that's the one that really takes the time. So I will continue with this, and we will see you in the next segment. Step 5 of track detail painting in Dawson Creek. I am painting the rails using Flocal Rail Brown. To get paint to adhere to the metal rails, the paint needs to be of a certain thickness, and I think an enamel paint is probably better than acrylic one for this particular application. And unlike the previous steps where I was using a very minimal amount of paint, for this one I want enough paint on the brush to be able to flow onto the rails and down onto the web. So I'm loading up the brush fairly liberally as I do this. So I paint the outside rails and then I paint the inside rails. We'll just show you a little bit of how this looks. I'm basically just putting the brush down inside the web of the rail and then just running it along. This step will result in a fair amount of paint going on the tops of the rails. That's not a problem as long as we clean it off fairly quickly. This color approximates what I'm seeing on my prototype, but I am aware that in different parts of the country or in different countries the rail might be a different color. We can also think about rails that are less used and might have rusted a little bit more, or rails that are in locations which are subject to excessive weathering, like at a coal mine or in a lumber mill or somewhere like that, where they might be a different color entirely. So that's the back rails. Again, I'm just nesting the brush down in that in the web of the rail. We're also hitting those tire retention clips, which in many cases are still gray, and we want to get those to a different color. And I'm doing sections of track that are between 9 and 12 inches long at a time, and that's just so that I have time to clean off the paint before it really sets up. Another alternative to painting these with a brush, there are some paint pens designed for painting rails and ties, and I've not tried those, but that might be another option. All right, there we go. That's that section done. So I'm going to take a wood block, and this will remove a fair amount of the paint, and it's fairly gentle on the rails. And then I will take a track cleaning block to remove whatever is remaining. And using the wood block first means that this doesn't get clogged with paint so much. So that's that section of track. Now I should talk about turnouts a little bit. To do these, we want to be careful to make sure we don't get paint in between the point rails and the stock rails. All right. So what I do with these is I paint the inside of each point rail. I do not attempt to paint the outside, and I do not attempt to paint the inside of the stock rails. I'm going to leave those as is. We also want to make sure we don't get too much paint in this hinge point here where these turn. And what I do after painting the turnout is I will immediately try to move the turnout back and forth just to make sure that it's free. And when all of this track painting is finished, I will go around one more time to make sure these points are all free before turning on my servos again. And what I don't want to have happen is a motor's trying to throw a turnout and one of the rails is stuck to the point rails, and next thing I know, we've got a damaged turnout that's got to come out. So I'll continue on with this, and we'll see you in the next step. Stage 6, painting the tie clips. I'm using Flowcool Rust. And what I'm going to do is just drag the brush along beside the rail and hit those tie clips. This is just a little highlight color, which I think really adds something to the overall effect. So I'll just do one of these tracks here and show you what this looks like. I'm basically using the rail as a guide, and I'm just going along and hitting the tops of these little clips. So I do the outside, the far rails first. Sometimes we get a little bit of paint on the tie beside the clip, and that's okay. It makes it look like a tie clip or a tie plate. This step does occasionally get a little bit of paint on the rails, so once again we've got the track cleaning block handy, and we'll wipe that paint off right away as soon as we're finished here. One of the challenges in doing all of this work has been getting my head underneath the lighting canopy so that I can see what I'm doing. So this has not exactly been comfortable work, so I'll be very glad when this is done. And we're just coming up to the halfway point through Dawson Creek Yard. So probably a few more days and I will have this major project of track painting finished. So there's that one section of track, and we're just going to clean the rails off. So this adds a bit of a rust color at the base of the rail. You know, I've observed on prototype trackage that we see those tie plates rust and stuff starts leaching out onto the ties, and it's just a nice little effect to have. This is a lighter color than the rail brown and the tie brown that we applied earlier. So again, we're building up an effect using a layering of colors, layering of different colors. And there we go. So I'll continue with this step and we'll move on to the finish line. All right, track detail painting is now finished. So it's been a campaign of several months to get this all done. The last section to be done was Dawson Creek Yard, so we'll just give you a tour of what that looks like now that it's been done. This is the middle trackage that I started with at the west end of the yard. And then coming through the yard lead and the west ladder. Those are all the paints that I used. So 6 stages of painting. And I'm really glad to have this done. The next step is going to be to work on the turnouts and get them operating again. There is the possibility that some of them may have gotten a little bit stuck with paint. So I want to check that out before I power up and have servos trying to move rails that are actually stuck with paint. So I want to free them all up manually first and make sure that everything's going to work nicely. This is the end of track currently here. That will eventually extend to the wall because I've got another 2 feet to play with now. So with respect to the turnouts, I just want to make sure that they're going to move freely before I actuate the servos, and then we're going to test all of them. I think I may have disturbed some of the servos on the upper level when I was working underneath. The clearances in here for my head were very tight, so I do need to check them all and make sure they're all working. And once that's done, then I'm going to give the track a really thorough clean and vacuum to remove any debris, and then we'll do some test runs and get the layout back up and running again. All right, so the track is all painted, and now I need to get working on reactivating the layout. We have Railway Modelers Meet of British Columbia coming up in a couple of months, and I'm hosting an operating session for that. So the first step is going to be to remove this newspaper that I used to mask the fascia and all the control panels. So that's all got to disappear. You also notice I put it on the backdrop just so we didn't get any errant sprays there. And that'll all be removed, and then we'll get to work on these turnouts. All right, the first step in reactivating the layout is going to be to make sure that all the turnouts are working. Now, I am aware that some of these are a little bit zizzed up with paint, and usually the point rail slightly attached to the stock rail. We want to free those up before I turn on power and have a servo try to move that. Otherwise we could break the joint between the point rail and the throw bar, and then that's very time consuming to replace. So I'm going to free all these up manually first before we turn on the power. And the servos allow us just to test the turnout back and forth without powering them up. So you can see this one's moving really well. So that one's good. If I just give a little tug on it, this one is not moving. So I'm going to get in there with my tweezers and free it up. And there we go. That one's moving. This one is frozen shut. So again, I'm going to go in between here with the tweezers and just separate it. And now it's moving back and forth nicely. So that's all it takes. You know, there's just a little bit of paint holding the turnout point rail to the stock rail. We just want to free that up. Okay, so those four are good. So now I know I can turn on the servo, the turnout will not be impeded, and we won't break a point rail. So I will continue on this process. I've got about 60 turnouts to do. Once they're all done, then we'll power up and see how well they're working under power. Okay, I have freed up all the turnouts. I think there were about 8 out of 60 that were slightly stuck. And just inserting the tweezers freed up those point rails, and I was able to wiggle them back and forth. So now I'm going to power up the auxiliary bus and activate all the servos. And then the next step will be to see how well they work. It is very possible that some of them have been disturbed, particularly on the upper deck where my head was in here and I bumped some of them. I've got about 4 turnouts where the throw wire has been bumped out of the throw bar, and I'll have to restore those to service. So we'll test this one first. That's good. When these haven't been used for a while, they are sometimes a little bit rough, so I'm going to have to spend some time just throwing them back and forth to get them going again. There's some silicone grease inside the servos, and when they haven't been used for a while, that can tend to jam up a bit, I noticed. So those are all working quite well, and I will continue with the testing. And once I've got these all fixed, the next step will be to undertake a thorough cleaning of the track. After working on the turnouts for a few minutes, I am basically down to 5 that require further attention. I've got one in Chetwynd where it's not going to the diverging route. I've got one that's completely jammed in Chetwynd down by the mill there. I've got one in Bond that's working, but one of the point rails is loose from the throw bar, so we'll have to do a throw bar replacement on that one. I've done that before with several turnouts, and that repair is usually fairly effective. We've got one up in Dawson Creek that's also been jamming up, and that's one that's been a problem for a while actually, so that's not a new issue. I have 2 in Dawson Creek which were not working, but now they are, so we're going to monitor them and make sure they stay healthy. And then we've got one where the servo is just bouncing back and forth, so it seems to have lost its alignment settings, so we'll try reprogramming it to see if we can fix that. So I'll work on those one by one and try and get back to the stage where we've got all of the turnouts working satisfactorily. This is the turnout for CAN 4 1 and 2 when I build the layout extension to the left here and reactivate my CAN 4 mill. This will be the 2 sidings where lumber flat cars get loaded. This one is just not responding at all to the toggle switch, so I'm gonna have to get underneath there and find out what's going on. Unfortunately, this servo is located right above the shelf where I have my power supplies for the lighting, so it's quite difficult to get into. So that's going to be get underneath the layout and try and figure out what's going on with this particular turnout. This is the turnout at the south end of the shop track in Chetwynd, and as you can possibly hear, it's doing a lot of buzzing. and occasionally it's losing control going back and forth. So we'll have to investigate this one and see what's going on. It works for a while, and then after a while it stops working, and it's just buzzing way too much. So we'll have to find out what's wrong with that one. This one will take some diagnostic work. This is the turnout at the north end of Bond Siding on the Fort St. John subdivision. The turnout and servo are working fine. However, this point rail is loose on the throw bar, and the fix for that is to replace the throw bar and put some tiny flathead screws in to lock the point rails down onto the throw bar. So we'll have a look at getting that fixed. It is working, but that point rail can get dislodged from time to time and cause derailment, so we do need to fix that. All right, 2 turnout issues here in Dawson Creek. This is the turnout for the west ladder, siding 3 in the yard at Dawson Creek. This servo is getting stuck going in one of the 2 directions, and I suspect it's got something inside is jamming it. Goes fine one direction, the other direction it makes a noise and gets stuck. So I think I'm going to have to remove that turnout and remove that servo and replace it with another one. So that'll be a job to do. This is the turnout that goes into ramp 1 and 2 where the trailer flat cars go in, and this one is just sort of bouncing back and forth. I've tested it without the toggle switch and it works fine, but when I use the toggle switch it tends to bounce back and forth a little bit. That tells me that the issue is in the toggle or in the place where the toggle switch joins onto the board, and that means that I'm going to have to potentially replace the toggle and the leads. There it goes. You can see it bouncing back and forth, so it's getting a confusing signal. So we'll work on those 2 and try and get them repaired. So I have finished repairing the 5 turnouts that had issues. I won't detail the repairs to them. I will simply review quickly what I did. This turnout is for the Canfor lumber mill. It's going to serve 2 tracks that are for loading of bulkhead flat cars, and right now this turnout doesn't go anywhere because I'm waiting to build the extension further that way. This turnout was not working at all, and I found that the servo arm had swung over in one direction and kind of gotten stuck. So what I did is I canceled out the programming and reprogrammed the endpoints, and this turnout is now working satisfactorily. And then we'll come over next to the south end of the shop track. And this turnout was operating in one direction and not the other direction. So I used the same procedure. I canceled the programming and reset the endpoints. And this one is now working again. And then we're going to go down to Bond on the Fort St. John subdivision. And we had a turnout there with some problems. So that's along here. Now this turnout had a couple of problems. Problem number 1 was that the near point rail had become detached from the throw bar, and the throw bar itself, which you can see here, had kind of gotten a little bit mangled over time, and it was only a question of time before we had a major failure here. So with the help of my friend Michael, we changed out the throw bar and we replaced it with one that's made from strip styrene. And there are 3 holes drilled in that strip, 1 for the throw wire and 2 for a pair of screws that are now securing the point rails in place. And with that change done, this is working much more effectively. So Michael and I have been working together on occasion to fix turnouts here, and also on his layout where I've made some electrical repairs now and then. So with those 3 turnouts done, we'll now go up to Dawson Creek and check up on 2 turnouts up there. Okay, 2 turnouts in Dawson Creek that are fairly close to each other and we're having issues. This back one serves the 2 ramp tracks, and that one was tending to bounce back and forth quite a bit. and I think we stopped that now. This is another one where I did the reprogramming, and it seems to have cured the problem. This one here, the servo was occasionally getting jammed and making a very loud noise, and I just think that the best solution was to change out the servo. So that's what we did. So that servo was changed out, and the new one is working much better. So there we go, 5 turnouts are now fixed. Just a few words on cleaning track here. I like to use these micro-engineering Bright Boy track cleaners. I find they're a little less abrasive than some of the other ones on the market, like the one that Pico sells. And these are available from Fast Tracks or from your local hobby shop. And I also like to avoid using fluid on the tracks. I like to keep the tracks dry if I can. So cleaning includes just running these blocks up and down the track. And of course, taking care in the turnouts, making sure we've got the point rails cleaned off nicely, especially after the track painting that's occurred. So I go through around the layout and clean with that. And then I follow that up with the vacuum cleaner. And this is to suck up any loose items that have come after using this. So we just do a quick vacuum. I also vacuum adjacent to the track because sometimes we have stuff there that the engines could potentially suck up. So after I've done that, then the third step would be to run a track cleaning car on occasion. And I find that if the layout's being used regularly, that's usually good enough. I do keep the windows in the layout room closed, and that keeps the dust down. So I'm going to get the layout all cleaned up, and then we can run some test trains. I'm trying a different method of wheel cleaning for the locomotives here. These are the Trix wheel brushes, which are sold for cleaning wheels on N-scale and Z-scale locomotives. And you simply place it on the track and then power up the locomotive and let it do its work. I'm using 2 of the brushes because the North American locomotives are longer than many of the European ones. So I'm going to try this method and see how I like it. It's a little cleaner than the old fluid and the rag trick, so I'm going to evaluate this and see how I like it. And here we are, the first test run over the layout since the reactivation. Got engines 812 and 804, and we'll do a test run over to Septimus and back on the Fort St. John subdivision, and then we'll do a test run up to Dawson Creek. I'm in the process of returning all of the structures to the layout. At this stage, most of the structures on the layout are actually cardboard mock-ups, which I built quite a few years ago now. And I am looking forward to the day when I can replace these with scratch-built structures. I think that'll be a very enjoyable part of the hobby. These were built from cereal box cardboard. I put styrene strips inside the corners to help keep them square, and I used heavy corrugated cardboard on the bottom for reinforcement to provide a solid base. This one was built way back in 2006 when I was first getting to work on the layout, so this is actually 20 years old and it's held up well. These are based on field measurements that I did in Dawson Creek. They've been drawn and colored to match the prototype as close as possible. These will serve as a reference when I come to build the actual styrene models, but for now they have served very well on the layout so that we know where we're spotting cars and what's happening there. So all the structures have been returned. I'm going to place some of the vehicles to add to the scene, and then the layout will be pretty much ready for operations again. I have also been returning vehicles to the layout. I place these on the layout and change them up every month or so. And these are a great way to augment a scene and to help set the era, even prior to final scenery work. There is a decent selection of 1970s era vehicles from various manufacturers, including Atlas, Classic Metalworks, GHQ, Showcase Miniatures, and Viking, to name a few. And there's also a lot of 3D printed vehicles available now as well. Here's a selection of vehicles from various manufacturers outside the depot at Chetwynd, and this will eventually be where the gravel parking lot is. Highway 97 passes underneath the railway just before the Pine River Bridge. Here I've placed a classic metalwork station wagon with camping trailer to suggest summer holiday traffic, and a motorways tractor and trailer which were seen in northern British Columbia during the 1970s. The Dawson Creek subdivision is crossed by numerous farm roads along its length, including one at Groundbirch, and this will eventually lead to a farm scene atop the helix. Here we see a GHQ Suburban and an Architect farm tractor with a Viking hay baler on the farm road. At Dawson Creek, a road crosses the line just before entering the yard. If memory serves, it's called Washington Road. This photograph shows cars on the road and also suitable vehicles in the adjacent Northwest Wood Preservers Mill, and that includes a GHQ log loader and logging truck. And vehicles such as these can be used to support industries and help to develop the scene. Another example of vehicles with industries, here we see a grain truck exiting the Alberta Pool elevator, and a British Columbia Railway tractor is sitting on the company trailer ramp. It was common to see some railway-owned vehicles at the depot in Dawson Creek, and there was also usually a camper van parked there, likely belonging to someone working in the depot. Across the parking lot, several trailers have been spotted at the Scott National Food Warehouse. The last fix before declaring the layout operational is this curve across the Highway 97 bridge on the Dawson Creek subdivision. I left this piece of track loose because I wanted to be able to remove the track and the bridge when it comes time to work on the road and the scenery in here. And after track painting, this track was sort of springing upward, and I also had a rather nasty kink here. This rail joint is between benchwork sections, and I've got half-length rail joiners here, and it just wasn't holding the track in alignment. And I think over time this foam track bed has allowed the track to move a little bit. So I think when it comes time to put this track in permanently, I'm probably going to go back down to the sub-road bed, put in new track bed, and relay this because it's over time it's got some issues. However, I need a temporary fix so that I can get back up and operating again. So what I've done is I've spiked the track with HO track spikes and also a steel pin right here. And then what I've done is I've glued the track down in just one spot here and in one spot here just to lock it down. And now it's much more stable and trains are operating over it without any issues. And as I said, once we get to putting the road and the scenery in, then this can be attended to more permanently. But for now, this will work. Another addition to the layout is a new master fast clock. This was prepared by my friend Victor, and it is being designed to fit into the central hutch here. This was inspired by a photograph I saw some years ago in the British Columbia Railway's train dispatch office during the 1970s, where they had a large LED clock readout in place of an analog one, very 1970s. This obtains the time wirelessly from my home modem, and it connects Wi-Fi to the router above the layout, and from there it connects to the 4 fast clock repeaters that are stationed around the layout. There are 3 in the main room, and there's 1 in the adjacent room. So with this clock, I can change from real time to fast time, and then I can get the fast clock to run, or I can pause it. I can select the start time, the ratio, and I can set the clock. It's sitting in here quite loosely right now, but I'm working on a support for it so that it won't go in like that. So this, our dispatchers had trouble seeing the time because when operators are in the room, it's hard to see the clocks, and now he's got it right in front of him. So big improvement. So we'll look forward to using this next session. Well, after 8 months of track detail painting and a few track fixes, the layout is now operational again. I've been running some tests with full-length trains, and everything seems to be going well. So I will leave you with a few videos of some trains that are running, and we'll see you again for the next layout update. Thank you for watching, and bye for now. as always, thank you to the individuals who have helped me with certain aspects of the work shown in this video, and thank you to all those who have subscribed to this channel. So thank you for watching, and I hope to be back with another update in the summer. I haven't made firm plans for the summer yet, but I do hope to be starting on scenery now that the track has been painted. And of course, along with that process will come ballasting of the track. So until then, peace be with you.